On this episode, we offset the awful New Year's Eve we just went through with fun stories and discussions on the best and most memorable ways to spend New Year's Eve in Bangkok.
So if you want to reminisce about the good times and get an early start on a great New Year's Eve 2021, you'll dig this episode of the Bangkok Podcast.
Sawadee Pimai, and welcome to the Bangkok Podcast. My name is Greg Jorgensen, a Canadian who was so sick of the aunties on my street not playing their 7 a.m. exercise music loud enough, so I came to Thailand in 2001, and the issue solved itself pretty quickly.
And I am Ed Knuth, an American who came to Thailand on a one-year teaching contract 20 years ago, fell in love with wandering the back soys of Sukhumvit Road on New Year's Eve, and I never left.
When you say wandering, do you mean stumbling?
Yeah, wandering, stumbling, pretty much what I was doing last night.
Lost and frightened.
Well, not really frightened, probably too clueless to be frightened, but just wandering.
All right, fair enough.
First, a huge thanks to all of our patrons who support the show. Patrons got a whole bunch of cool stuff, including our ad-free regular show a day early, behind-the-scenes photos and videos of our interviews, discounts on swag, which you can find on our website, and various other things that aren't available to regular listeners. But best of all, patrons also get an unscripted, uncensored bonus episode every week where we riff on current events and random topics. We just finished recording this week's bonus show, and we chatted about Greg's successful but slightly unnerving trip to Chiang Mai due to COVID developments, the new and incredibly frustrating COVID outbreak in Bangkok, and why I am definitely not a nerd simply because I play online car sports games with my buddy. To become a patron, head to bangkokpodcast.com/support.
I wrote that intro, so I kind of tricked you into a car sports game. Sounds a little bit juvenile, but you're not a nerd, Ed. You're cool. And I play those games too.
Of course you do.
Yeah. And we're cool. My mom thinks I'm cool. All right. Well, before we jump into it, everyone, we want to mention our first giveaway of the new year, which is on our first show of the new year. Now, a while ago, we got an email from a listener named Marshall who told us about a Bangkok company named Style Seal that makes some pretty cool masks that protect against pollution and plague. So on a whim, I got in touch with Jimmy, who runs the company, and I ordered a few dozen custom masks with our logo on them. And they look pretty slick. If you check our Facebook page, you can see how cool they look. So the deal is this. If you live in Thailand, send us an email at bangkokpodcast@gmail.com with the subject mask, and we'll choose 10 at random and send you a mask. Only in Thailand, though, everyone, because getting mail out into the world right now is a little bit unpredictable. But many thanks to Jimmy at Style Seal, and these masks are pretty sweet looking.
Right. And since we're experts on what it means to be cool and what it means to be a nerd, we can tell you that if you wear a mask with the Bangkok Podcast logo on it, you're definitely cool.
Right. Yeah. Definitely want to be taking fashion advice from two middle-aged white guys.
Hey, come on. We're expats. That's cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Coming from me, who has 300 black t-shirts in my closet and one yellow one for Father's Day. All right. Well, on this episode, we thought we'd reminisce a little bit about New Year's Eve. We're recording this on January 1st. Both of us are still recovering a little bit from last night. Now, unsurprisingly, New Year's Eve in Bangkok is usually pretty awesome and memorable, but this year the celebration was somewhat between muted and absolute garbage for obvious reasons. So to lift our spirits a bit, Ed and I thought we'd share some of our old stories and memorable experiences from New Year's past in an effort to kick off 2021 right as we look forward to what will hopefully be a very boisterous and enjoyable New Year's Eve for 2022. Now, Ed, I did some research here and I went back into my old photos and I looked at photos from New Year's Eve going back a decade or so. And I used to have some real fun on New Year's Eve, but all of that stopped around 2014 or so. And let me ask you a question. What year was my son born?
I'm going to go 2014.
That's right. Yeah. So that kind of puts a kibosh on any New Year's shenanigans back when compared to being a single man in Bangkok. But
well, it's interesting because I used to have a super active New Year's Eve, and it's funny because mine probably got boring around the same time, and I don't have any children. So I think a lot of people, as you get older, New Year's Eve seems to be one of those holidays that goes down in significance. I mean, would you agree?
Okay, I guess so. Yeah, so that's one less thing I can blame my son for. Okay, that's good for him.
Right.
That's good news for him.
Yeah, like you said, this year, I did go out last night, and I am suffering right now with a hangover and a cold, which I got wandering the back streets of Sukhumvit late last night. So I'm hurting right now, which means I did go out and I did have fun last night. But the city was pretty calm compared to how it normally is. Normally, New Year's Eve is pretty wild and out of control with like incredible crowds, incredible traffic. It's really a city that doesn't shut down until very late on New Year's Eve. But last night was different with officially bars were supposed to close at midnight, and most appeared to do that. So because I was there, I was wandering Sukhumvit late at night, and most bars definitely were closed by midnight.
Yeah.
Although there were a few defying restrictions and things like that, which I managed to find. But in general, I would say last night was maybe 10 or 20% of what Bangkok normally would be on New Year's Eve. So I like this idea for a show. Let's talk about better times.
Yeah. Now, my first New Year's experience was in one of the very not traditional, but a typical modern New Year's Eve in Bangkok, which was there's several places in the city where there are just tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people in normal times. Down by the river, maybe like down around the Grand Palace area, Khao San Road. But Central World is a massive one. And my very first New Year's Eve in Bangkok was at Central World. And I was sort of in awe of the crowds.
Central World, for visitors who don't know, is a huge shopping mall. Used to be called the World Trade Center, kind of in the center of the shopping district near Siam Square, not too far from Siam Square. And it's, I would say it's one of the two centers for the New Year's Eve countdown. I feel like one center is at Central World, where they do a big countdown with festivities and MCs and performers and like hundreds of thousands of people. And the other center is down on the river near Saphan Taksin, where the city does its biggest fireworks display. Would you agree those are the two main?
Yeah, I think so. And my first year actually was not very good. Actually, this reminds me of my first Songkran too, which was also pretty awful because I went to Khao San Road. I nearly got drowned in beer when someone turned a pitcher of beer over my head for some reason. That's a different story. But I remember my first, I was new to Bangkok. So even in the winter months, I was still sweating. It was very hot to me. And the SkyTrain stops running at 2 a.m., I think, on New Year's Eve. And taxis, especially out of Central World, are impossible to get. So I ended up walking all the way back to Tong Lo on the Petbury side.
Oh, wow.
Walking down Petbury Road at 3 a.m. on New Year's Eve. It's not very fun because it's kind of a crappy road. It's dark and dusty.
Yeah, that is a classic New Year's problem, is how you're going to get home. In general, I would say that taxis are almost always available in Bangkok. There are just so many of them. But New Year's Eve is just one of those nights where so many people are going out that the taxis are just jammed, and you could wait hours. So I guess walking was the last thing you could do, but that is a bit of a bummer.
Yeah, and that's a good thing that maybe it's a strategy for next year. You always got to think about how are we going to get out of this place when the festivities die down.
My mini story is I was in the other area, Saphan Taksin area, at a restaurant. On a kind of a rooftop to see the fireworks with my wife. And then when we left, we got stuck in the massive crowds near. So this would be, Charon Krung, kind of near Saphan Taksin.
Right.
We got stuck in these massive crowds, and we saw a free taxi, and a lot of people were chatting with the driver and then not getting in. So I'm like, what's up with that? And the guy wanted money, he wouldn't go on the meter.
Oh, yeah,
and, and so, I was with my wife. And so I said, Samurai baht, 300 baht. And he's like, no. So I'm like, okay, Sirai baht, 400 baht. No. I'm like, Howari baht, 500 baht. No. And my wife's like, let's go somewhere else. And I'm like, Hokurai baht, like 600 baht. No. And, and then I just go, Jetroy, 700. And he goes, okay. And so, so we paid 700 baht to get really from Charon Krung to I think I was already on Charon Sinitwang, so this was only about 4 or 5 years ago. So really not far, but I paid 700 baht. My wife was not happy, but I in the cab, I was like, it's worth it because we're like, what are we going to do? Walk?
Yeah, right.
So this is a good example. It's the guy who's supposed to use the meter. I mean, technically, it was illegal to him to go off meter, but it's a very good example of how capitalism and the free market work. I mean, that was the market value of a taxi at so this was probably at 12:45.
Right.
So it's at
peak
on New Year's,
shit show hours.
Yeah, peak shit show hours in Bangkok, and that's the price of a taxi was 700 baht. And so I was totally happy to get in a cab and just boom, my night's done, and then I can just chill out while he fights the crowd.
Right. That's what I've talked about on the show before too. Like Bangkok is very much a city of how much will you pay to make this problem go away?
That's right.
And that dictates supply and demand, the cost.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it's funny. I don't know if he could sense it, but that was about the most I would pay. Like, I don't think I'd pay 1,000 baht. There's something about 1,000. I'd be like, no way, I'm paying 1,000 baht on a ride, right, on a ride that would normally be maybe 60 baht, like right, in a normal thing. I'm not, but I paid basically 10 times the meter.
Yeah, well, if that was worth it to you, then it was worth it to you.
Yeah, so that's New Year's Eve for you, man. Like that's a typical New Year's Eve.
Right.
Now this is a good time for me to mention last night. So shockingly, last night I went to my favorite blues bar, which is where I was last year on New Year's Eve. But this year, because the bar had to close at midnight, the music stopped at 11:30, and they said, "Hey, we're not going to do a countdown because we got to close."
Okay.
And so I knew my buddy was having a private party on Sukhumvit, so I was like, okay, I'll race over to Sukhumvit. I assumed I was going to miss the countdown, but I figured they would be hanging out because it's a private party. They'd be hanging out later. So I got in a taxi at 11:35. And just to show you how unusual last night was, I got all the way from Banglampu to Sukhumvit in 15 minutes.
That's crazy.
There was no traffic. So I actually got there to my buddy's party in time to see the countdown on TV.
Nice. Well, my wife and my son are staying with at her mom's house in a different part of Bangkok for a few days. So I got the house to myself where I'm cleaning up and preparing for their return. So last night I just had a buddy come over to my place and we played video games. And I was in bed about 12:30. So it was a super quiet New Year's Eve to me. But I found myself at midnight, the fireworks were going off, and I live on the river, so they're very loud. And I was kind of like getting old man annoyed. I'm like, would you just shut up? Like, I was building my son's robot. I'm like, quit banging. It's very loud. I'm trying to concentrate here.
I still think you're cool, Greg. I just want you to know that.
Thanks, man. Your video games and my robots, we're still cool. Now, I think we've talked about this one before, and I think we even have video of this that I've shared before, but we'll put it in the show notes again. Why not? But I think you and I can agree that one of our most memorable evenings on New Year's Eve has been the year that a bunch of us and a bunch of our friends rented a boat. And
that's right. Well, let me say this before you get into the specific story. My best New Year's Eves in Bangkok have been spent on a boat on the river to watch the fireworks. So as everyone knows from my show intro, I've been here 20 years. And I think we haven't done the boat in many years, but I think I've done the boat at least 10 years. So it was something.
Really, that many? I didn't know that.
Yeah. No, we did it many times. Oh. Like it was a regular thing. We did it every year. We did it every, there was maybe one or two exceptions, but I think I've probably done it 10 times. And let me just give my general advice on New Year's Eve in Bangkok. I think the best thing to do is to get on the river or near the river to see the fireworks. Now, obviously, there's a lot of other people who want to do that. So I think a boat is the best thing because the good thing about the boat is you can get on the boat, watch the fireworks, and then you can go down the river and get away from the crowds and get off the boat away from the crowds.
Yeah, it's a great way to do it.
So I think that's my number one piece of advice on New Year's. I mean, if you have time to plan and you're willing to rent and get a bunch of people together, it does take some forethought and planning, and you need some contacts. But to me, that's my number one piece of advice: is get a boat on the river, because that's the best times that you and I have had, and I've done it many times. Now, you and I have already been talking about maybe we'll do it again. Maybe we'll go back to the boat, which we haven't done in a while. Maybe we'll do that next year, but we'll talk about that later. But if you can't, I still think getting down to the river. So like I said, I think Central World is just too unbelievably crowded. Yeah. So for me, I would, the other thing I've done, like I said, I did with my wife is, you make a reservation at a restaurant close to the river that has a view of the fireworks. And they usually have deals. It can be a little bit expensive, but it's a special night. So I'm all about getting to the river and being able to watch the fireworks. I think that's prime New Year's Eve experience in Bangkok.
Yeah, I would totally agree. It's a good way to put it. It's a prime New Year's Eve Bangkok experience. It's you can't get any nicer than that.
That's what I think. Yeah.
Yeah. That New Year's Eve was memorable for me because the boat one. I've only done it twice, I think, but there was that one.
You only did it twice, dude. You're an amateur. I've done it like 10 times.
Yeah, well, remember my old apartment was in Chinatown, and I had a huge balcony that looked right over the river.
Right.
So for several years, I never needed to get the boat. I could just go on my balcony.
True that.
I remember after the boat one year, we went up to Khao San Road after the fireworks, and we managed to get a tuk-tuk, and we fit 9 people in a tuk-tuk. I think it was 9.
I've done that. I don't know if I was that sounds like something I was at, because I've done that. The cool thing about the boat is you can get off the boat wherever you want. Like I can drop it where you want. Right. So even before the fireworks, we would stop near a pier that had bars. So we would go down the river, stop, get off, have some beers, get back on the boat and go down. And then after watching the fireworks, like you said, some years we went to Khao San.
Yeah, that was a fun night. And I remember my place on the tuk-tuk was standing on the back bumper, holding onto the roof. Not recommended. The Bangkok podcast does not recommend doing dangerous, silly things like this. But that's how we got to
are there any photos or videos of that tuk-tuk ride?
I do have a few. Why don't we send a few of those out to our patrons?
Okay, yeah, maybe that's not for public consumption.
Maybe not.
Now, Greg and I have told a story before, so we're not going to get into it in great detail, but we told it before. But this most memorable New Year's involved our boat getting too close to the barge that was launching the fireworks, and I played a small role in this because, a small role in the story in that I think I was the only person that was saying, "Hey, we got to get away from this barge." Like, I was there with my wife. We were recently married, I believe, and I was there going like, hey, because the fireworks are launching, professional, high-level fireworks are launching. These are like artillery shells going off.
Yeah.
And our boat was drifting closer and closer. And so I was saying, I started to the people around me, I started going, hey, like we're getting too close to that damn thing. And then within seconds, some of the fireworks misfired and shot into the boat, as we've mentioned before.
Right. All you can hear, we'll put a link in the show notes to the video, which we've done before. Again, we're not going to talk about this in great detail, but you can hear everyone scream, and then I go, "That was awesome!" And then the video stops, but then what we heard was like, "Help!"
Yeah, basically 3 people got shoved into the river, and thank God no one was seriously injured. But it made for a crazy New Year's because we had to pull people out of the river, and then of course we had to get to shore and get them blankets and cleaned up and stuff like that. And one person actually got hit with the firework and was not seriously injured, but did have kind of minor, kind of first degree type burns on her shoulder, and so someone did actually have to go to the hospital.
Yeah, that was memorable, that's for sure. And I mean, New Year's Eve is all about being memorable. So
yeah, that was a crazy. It did have this mishap, which was not a good thing, but it did lend the whole evening this kind of out of control. It was just a weird, out of control, crazy night. And of course, we kept going out. So the person who got injured, it wasn't too serious, and she had some friends with her, so they went off to the hospital. But of course, the rest of us continued on to more craziness.
Yeah. Now, the worst New Year's Eve that we've ever had in Bangkok. Again, you and I were at the same place. We were having dinner very close to Ekamai. This was in 2009. And
wow, you're good on the years, man. I can't remember when any of this stuff.
Oh no, I can't remember either. Like I said, I went through the photos earlier, and I went through the pictures for each year going back about 10 or 12 years. So that's how I got the dates. But 2009, me and you and your wife and about 7 or 8 friends were having a nice sort of quiet New Year's Eve dinner at a restaurant down near Ekamai. And shortly after midnight, we could hear some sirens and more sirens and more sirens, and they just kept going and kept going.
I remember this.
We were like, damn, something must have happened somewhere. And it was only really the next day that we discovered that was the fire at Santika nightclub, which killed 66 people, I think it was. Yeah, I mean,
it's literally a nightmare. It's something that I don't even want to talk about very much, but we should mention it because it does show you that crowded clubs, man, are just dangerous. And, for some reason, I associate these like jam-packed clubs with these horrible fires that kill dozens of people. It always seems like it's in South America somewhere. I don't know why, but I always seem to be reading about in Brazil, like this crazy thing happened. But man, it happened in Bangkok, and it was just horrific.
Yeah.
And that nightclub was not far from where I lived at the time. That was when I lived on Soi Suan Wee Chai off of Pet Buri. So I was at best 10 minutes from that club.
Yeah.
And I even had some friends who were planning on going there that night. Luckily, they didn't get in because it was too crowded. And they had asked me or told me, like, hey, we're going to go to Zantika that night. So I was never considering it because I'm not a club guy, but I actually was invited to go there that night.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
And my friends from work tried to go, but it was so crowded they didn't get in. Thank God.
Yeah. It was a tragic, awful evening, end to the year, and it, the shockwaves for that were felt. Like that was front page news for weeks after New Year's Eve.
Well, I mean, it did highlight how scammy the fire regulations and permitting system was. Because Bangkok, as always, as we said many times, Bangkok has often good laws that are typically unenforced, or there's bribery or corruption, and so the club was violating tons of safety regulations.
Yeah, but man, 66, mostly young people having the night of their life. Like it was just an awful tragedy. And it just put a sour twist on the whole New Year, right? Like starting off on the worst foot possible. It was pretty terrible.
For sure.
Yeah. And I had one other funny New Year's Eve. I got out of Bangkok one year with my wife and some friends, and I want to mention this just because it's a funny story. But we spent New Year's Eve in Chiang Mai, and we were planning on coming back on the train the next afternoon, like 5 p.m. We were going to catch the train on January 1st back to Bangkok out of Chiang Mai. And so I thought, well, this was back when I was riding my mountain bike a lot. And I was like, well, this was 2012. And I was like, well, why don't I do like there's a company where you can sign up, and they basically like they drive you up to the top of Doi Suthep, which is like this big famous mountain in Chiang Mai. And they give you the bike and the shoulder pads and the chest armor and the helmet and stuff. And then you like sort of do a downhill ride all the way down the back of Doi Suthep mountain down into the city. And I thought that's crazy. Awesome. So I arranged for these guys to come and pick me up at my hotel, and there was a couple of other people in the back of this pickup truck that pulled up, and we pulled into the road to go up to Doi Suthep. But I didn't take into consideration that temples on New Year's Day in Thailand are often thronged with people because they're going to pray for the new year and stuff. And Doi Suthep is one of the most famous temples in all of Thailand. So the very curvy multi-kilometer road going up the mountain was just traffic jam hell. And we were in the back of a pickup truck. Long story short, by the time we got to the top, it took about over an hour. And we were all sick in the back, like from the fumes and from the twisting, and just, so we took about half an hour to just sort of sit in the fresh air and get cleaned out. And just before I started, and my stomach started rumbling, and I was like, I don't feel too hot. So we're going down, and it was about half an hour later. We'd stopped about halfway down for some coffee at this little like mountain coffee shop thing they had. And, I puked, and
really?
Yeah. And I started sweating, cold sweat. And again, long story short, what happened was I had gotten food poisoning from my hotel breakfast.
There's no good time to get food poisoning, but that is an especially bad time.
Yeah. Cause I was halfway down the roadless side of the mountain. And the guides were there, and the other people are like, are you okay? And like every minute I'm feeling worse. Like exponentially worse. Like every minute I felt twice as worse as I did the minute before. And I'm just like, oh God, I can't do this. Cause I didn't want to be going down some jagged, rocky trail and pass out or something like that.
Right. And you don't want to like shit all over yourself.
That's also
in public. I try not to do that when I'm in public.
Yeah. Show up at the stop. Here's your bike back, and then waddle off to the hotel. But, so there's no cars, there's no roads, and these guys can't just like take me back because they've got the rest of their clients to take care of. So I'm like, what can I do? And they said, well, really the only thing you can do is like walk back up the mountain, push your bike back up the trail you just came on, and then ride down the front side of the mountain where the road is. So at least it's an easier ride. And it was just like, so I just like pushed my bike up the mountain and is awful sweating and sick. And I
that's
finally
ugly.
crossed like some beat up dirt road, and this like gnarly 1940s tuk-tuk was driving by, or Songtao, the red pickup trucks. And I was like, can I please throw my bike in the back and you can drive me to the top? And so the guy sort of kicked me out of the top, and I managed to ride down the front of Doi Sutep all the way to Chiang Mai University. And I didn't eat for 3 days. It was so bad.
Not a good time to get food poisoning.
No, I also started off that year on the wrong foot, but it got
That has
better
to,
from there.
okay. So that's got to be your worst New Year's then in Thailand.
Yeah, it probably was. Not
I
very
think
good.
I've managed, I'd have to really think about it because I don't think I've had any particularly bad New Year's. I've had some better than others, but I think I've avoided any horrible New Year's. So I don't have a parallel story.
That's good. You don't want a parallel story.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So fingers crossed that the coming new year, we've got 364 days, that it's going to be a better one, because 2020 was, I think we're all glad to see that in the rear view.
For sure. Well, like I said, I would love to plan a big New Year's Eve next year. I think we should get a big boat on the river, maybe make it a Bangkok podcast meetup. You guys have heard it here first, so you can start planning your trip to Thailand for New Year's next year.
Yeah, no one can say we didn't have enough time to plan this one.
That's right. We got 1 year because I really want to get back on a boat, because that is my advice. Like, the best New Year's I've had in Thailand have been on a boat on the river where you can ride around and watch the fireworks and get off at different piers and check out different bars.
But it's not free though. Like the boat that we had was, how many people did it hold? Like 30?
Yeah, no, it can be expensive, but the key is if you have the right number of people. So, the boat might be, 20,000 baht, but then if you have 30 people, it's less than 1,000 baht each. And then on New Year's, people are used to spending some money. So I think if you and I decide to do it next year, I want to go big, man. So I want to go big.
All right.
Yeah. So we'll talk about it. But, just this is a bit more than a bit silly, but mark your calendar right now. For 364 days from now.
Let me do it. Hey, Siri. In July 10th at 10 a.m., remind me to ask Ed how the New Year planning is going.
Okay, your reminder is set for the 10th of July 2021, 10 a.m.
There we go.
All right. So that'll give us 6 months to figure it out.
Nice. Well, hopefully we can see some of our guests there. That'll be a really fun evening.
Let's do it.
Yeah, so there we go, everyone. We hope your New Year's Eve was small but fun and memorable. And I think it's considering what's going on right now, it's better to be small and quiet rather than loud and dangerous. So we hope that the next one is better.
For sure.
Alrighty, let's get into some love, loathe, or live with, where one of us picks a particular aspect of life in Bangkok, which we then discuss and decide if it's something we love about living here, loathe about living here, or have come to accept as something that we just have to learn to live with, no matter how we feel about it. And this week, Ed, it is all you.
All right, Greg, kind of random, but I've heard other people complain about this.
All right.
So I'm just curious your take. Tourists wearing elephant pants.
Sweet, sweet elephant pants.
Classic thing in Thailand. Does it bother you?
It's a really good question. It does bother me, but I think because I am a petty little man who likes pointing out the flaws in other people, I think it's just become such a cliche now. It'd be like
Right.
going to New York and buying an I Heart NY t-shirt. Like I'm sure
That's right.
the jaded New Yorkers look at people like that and be like, stupid tourists.
Yeah, so listeners, in case you don't know what elephant pants are, they're kind of baggy, loose-fitting pants with like elephants on them, right? I mean, that's it.
Yeah, they're
That's what
made
they
of
are,
very
right?
thin cotton, and they're pants that you would wear around like cleaning the house or pajamas or something like that.
Yeah, and so there's a well-known stereotype of tourists like walking around in sandals or flip-flops and elephant pants, and I don't know actually it's a common thing for expats like us to rip on tourists, so there's a little bit of a friction between the expat community and the tourist community.
Right.
Like they're classless tourists and like we're classy expats, right?
We wear real clothes, yeah. Like I've never seen anyone wearing elephant pants and not thought that looks sloppy.
Right.
It's impossible to look refined or nice or presentable in elephant pants, I think.
Well, I got to be honest. It's never really bothered me that much. I don't know how you could love it. I've never owned elephant pants myself. I don't know how you could look down the street and see these people walking around and say, "Well, that's cool." So, but I got to admit, I'm not a loath. Although I do have friends. I do have friends who are experts who are like they just hate elephant pants and they think they're horrible.
I'm not a loathe either. I'm a live with on this. And like I said, you look sloppy wearing them, but there's nothing wrong with looking sloppy. Like if you're going to like a buddy's barbecue or you're just having a layabout day or something like that, no problem. But you know, a lot of tourists, I think, put them on and then think that they look awesome, and you don't. Really.
Right. Yeah, you don't look awesome. But you know, the other thing is, you know, some people say, well, tourists are kind of guests in another country. They should kind of be more concerned about how they look. But then again, they are on holiday. You know, on holiday, you chill out, right?
Yeah, fair enough. But this is the clash. This is the Venn diagram, the overlap between holiday Bangkok and real life Bangkok.
Right.
So I think there's some overlap there with like you and me who wouldn't dress like that in regular Bangkok.
Exactly right.
So I don't know. I'm a live with. I don't think anyone looks particularly good in them, but go ahead.
I'm with you.
But you should also realize that you don't look particularly good in them.
Yeah, you look a bit ridiculous. Just to be aware.
Yeah. So as long as you're okay with that, then more power to you, I guess.
Alrighty.
Cool.
There you go. We agree. Live with. Okay, a final thanks to our patrons who support the show. Patrons get a ton of cool perks and the warm, fuzzy feeling knowing that they're helping support the show. Find out more by clicking support on our website. And connect with us online. We're Bangkok Podcast on social media, bangkokpodcast.com on the web, or simply bangkokpodcast@gmail.com. We love hearing from our listeners and always reply to our messages.
True that. You can also listen to each episode on YouTube. You can chat with us online or reach out to me on Twitter or Instagram where I am BKK Greg. So thanks for listening, everyone. Happy New Year. Stay safe, and we'll see you back here next week.
For sure. Hello.
You know, as soon as we're done recording this, I've got to go and sit and put together a model toy robot for my son that he got for Christmas.
Cool.
That sounds cool, but it's one of these Bandai ones, these like incredibly detailed collector ones that have 1,000. I literally have tweezers to put some of these parts together. It's ridiculous.
Damn.
My poor eyes cannot handle this. So I've been doing it for about 3 hours and I've managed to build his chest and arms. So got a good night ahead of me.